Let's get to our discussion now. The spate of insecurity in many parts of the country is a source of concern. Almost every geopolitical zone suffers one attack or the other. The worsening insecurity has seen a rise in killings, arson, bombings, and abductions, and other criminal vices, especially in the northeast, northwest, and north central regions, owing to the activities of terrorist groups, bandits, and clashes between farmers and herders. Stakeholders have suggested hiring mercenaries to tackle the problem, while others are offering support for the state policing suggestion. That's what we'll be talking about next. And joining me for more on this discussion via Zoom is Security, Risk Management and Intelligence Specialist Kabir Adamu. He's also the founder and Chief Executive Officer, Beacon Consulting Limited. It's nice to have you join me, Kabir.
Good morning, Mike. The pleasure is mine. I hope you had a good weekend.
Well, it was a wonderful weekend. Thank God for the rains around here. I wonder if it rained where you were.
Yeah, it did. We are having a pleasant weather in Abuja too.
All right. Now, let's get to this issue. You and I have been on this program so many times talking about security, analyzing some of the challenges and some of the hopes that Nigeria had based on some of the things government was trying to do at one time or the other. But you will agree with me that Nigerians in the northern part, the three regions in the northern part of the country, and even the southeast right now, a lot of Nigerians are not going to bed with their two eyes closed. What would you say about all of the assurances and all of the strategies and all of the different appointment and reappointment of security chiefs at one time or the other, and all of those impact on the security and effort of government?
Mike, in simple terms, there is room for improvement. And this is a lot, actually. Not just minor improvement, but major improvement. And this is because, like you mentioned in the introduction, I do run a consultancy. And part of what we do is to keep track of these types of security incidents. Now, to our utter amazement and, in fact, sadness, in March, we recorded about 1,490 deaths in Nigeria. Now, we also did an analysis of the quarter from January to March, and we recorded about 3,500 deaths within that first quarter. Now, I stand bold to say that makes Nigeria among the first three countries to suffer this type of casualties across the world. And if that is the case, then it means these efforts require more. And for lack of a better way to put this, it means we, as Nigerians, the entire 2 million of us, need to take charge of our security. Time has gone really where we look at anyone to say, look, protect us. This is the time, I think, that we should take charge of our security. And I don't mean, by saying this, I don't mean we should take guns and start fighting who we think the enemy is, because that in itself would be even more dangerous. What I mean is we're in a political year. The narrative that would determine the 2023 elections are being determined at the moment. I think we need to speak more about security so that it becomes a major narrative determining the 2023 elections. Any person we vote, from the chair at the chairman level up to the president, should be someone who would tackle this issue of security, and not just tackling it by mere words, telling us in clear terms how he or she is going to address the issue of insecurity in the country at the moment. Otherwise, unfortunately, what the security sector has become is like, you are using a basket to fetch water. Money is being pumped into it. The 2022 budget says about 2.4 trillion naira has been voted for security. And that, in my honest opinion, that's not all of it, because there are aspects like the security vote that are not captured under that 2.4 trillion. There is no other sector of the economy that is getting this much money. So the problem is really not that of money. It's really about capacity and capability.
All right. Just about a week ago, we saw the report that the United States has approved about $1 billion worth of equipment to be sold to Nigeria. And Nigerians are still asking the question, because when the issue of the 12 Super Tucanos was brought and sold to Nigerians, a lot of people were happy that the coming of the Super Tucanos will bring an end to, or at least to a great extent, the issues of terrorism and banditry and kidnapping and insecurity. We're still talking about an additional equipment again worth $1 billion to be brought in from the United States to fight the same thing that 12 Super Tucanos were meant to do. Would that be a game changer? What do you make of that, though?
Yeah, the weaponry that is mentioned under that contract, specifically the helicopters, would be necessary, especially given the nature of threat profile in Nigeria. A significant portion of the threat issues that we're dealing with are urban issues where the enemy embeds himself or herself within the community, and then attacks sometimes the community or even the security forces. So we need a precision style weaponry, and these helicopters would actually provide that. So they would complement what we have in the Super Tucano. The Super Tucano has been very useful. If you notice, in the last few months, we've seen a drastic reduction. In fact, in terms of percentages, we've seen an 80% reduction in security challenges in the northeast of the country. And most of this can be attributed to the successes that the Super Tucano has afforded us. So they've been very good in that regard. And I know there are limitations in the contract that has prevented us from using the Super Tucano in other locations. But let me also state categorically that no matter the amount of weapons we acquire, as long as we do not do a couple of things, then frankly, we're not going to end this. Number one, these weapons are just one component of the security requirement. The soft component of this security requirement, such as addressing the grievances, unifying Nigerians, reducing poverty, reducing unemployment, stopping the proliferation of small arms and light weapons, increasing border protection, drug addiction, climate change, and adapting in measures to reduce the impact of climate change. As long as we don't do this, there is no amount of weapon that we'll acquire that will allow us to address the security challenges. The second component is the force multipliers within the security forces themselves. I always want to remind us that we have about 27 ministries, departments, and agencies in security. When we concentrate on just 3 or 4 of them, those are the military units, then we're abandoning about 23. And so we need to look critically at the role of the other 23. Border protection, as an example, it's not the role of the military. The customs and immigration, why can't we put the searchlight on them the same way we're putting the searchlight? Because the moment we increase this border protection and reduce the inflow of both material as well as humans who support this security threat profile that I've mentioned, then we would have succeeded in increasing our security. It's also very important that we increase the collaboration, coordination, and cooperation between these 27 ministries, departments, and agencies. Then we should also ensure that there is a form of performance appraisal within them. I liken what we have at the moment to a situation where you have a leaking bucket and you just drop the bucket thinking the leakage will stop. No, we need to ensure that there is some form of performance appraisal. Just last week, Mr. President issued a directive to these agencies to rescue the kidnapped victims alive. What kind of performance appraisal measures are we going to put to that? Is it going to be just a directive without any performance appraisal? If that is the case, then perhaps we'll come back in the next 1 year and still be discussing about that directive. And then lastly, we also need to ensure that we as Nigerians realize that the elements of national power as we understand them, including national unity, including our persons, the 200 million plus that we have, are also aspects that can contribute to this security. How do we harness and harvest the intelligence that can be gotten from these 2 million persons to support the role of the security agencies? So it's not about equipment alone. It's also about all of these other issues that I've mentioned.
All right, now let's talk about the issue of personnel. Now, we've heard different times where some analysts will say that the military is overstretched whether it's the Army or the Air Force or the Navy and all the supporting agencies and all of that. Now, every year, at least from what we see, there are retirements every year for people who have been in the system and have, reached their regular years of service, and they need to retire, of course, by law. But when we have people like that leaving the system, some of them who are even senior intelligence specialists and experts and all of that, how do we make use of people like that, even when they're out of the system formally? Well, how do we rely on some of their expertise to ensure that they contribute to the fight against terrorism, especially if we're bringing in new people every year like we do? It will take time for those people to be able to catch up and have the required expertise that we need.
Thank you, Mike. So one of the greatest challenges in this country is that we do not have a database of these retired or dismissed officers. And I stand to be corrected. I say this with all sense of responsibility. It's one of the things that I've been recommending over time. We need to start by having such a database. You cannot train somebody in weapon handling. You can't train someone in TTP techniques, all the techniques and technology and policies and practice in warfare, and then just release him out there in the public. He is a danger. Unless you find a way to make use of him, in a manner that would contribute to your national development. Otherwise, the enemy will find work for him. So start with having a database of every person who has walked through each of these 27 MDAs that I've mentioned. And then once you have the database, profile them, know what they're doing. Now, it may seem like a very difficult task, but believe me, we have no option but to do that. The alternative is to allow the bad guys out there to engage these trained persons. And, once someone is aggrieved, and some of them are actually aggrieved, they left the services with various issues, grievances. So it's very easy for a trained person who is trained in intelligence to use that grievance to recruit them and use them for whatever purpose. So let's start with that. Have that database, know who they are, know where they are, know what they are doing. Number two, in direct response to your question, what other countries do is to have something like a think tank, policy development think tanks, or even security issue think tanks. In the US, for instance, you have several of these think tanks. They write policy papers, they contribute to security issues at different levels. In Nigeria here, yes, we have, as an example, the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies. I know they release occasional documents and papers where they advise government. There is also the Association of Alumni of I think, the National Defense College and things like that. But you see, those are very restricted groups. You have to be, for instance, a retired military personnel of a certain rank before you join this association of the alumni of the Defense College or even the National Institute. So at all the various levels, we need to have this type of think tanks that is able to incorporate all of these retired persons into roles that make them feel that they are contributing to the society. While they are serving, I think we also need to enhance the pre-retirement skill acquisition services that we provide. I know the military is doing very well in that regard. They do have some pre-retirement training exercises, but the other agencies need to also emulate that. So in a nutshell, there are different aspects, levels that we need to put in place so that we make these sets of special persons, actually, they're special because the kind of skills they have, the ordinary person does not have those type of skills. And if you allow them out there, then those skills are going to be used against you. I mean, think about it. You go to a village now and drop a gun. Perhaps it will be a little bit difficult for anyone to be able to use that gun. But can you imagine the level of sophisticated weapon handling that we're seeing among some of these threat elements? The other time it was, I think, an 18-year boy in somewhere in Kaduna, that was the proficiency with which he decoupled an AK-47. I doubt even if our security forces are going to do it. Somebody trained him in doing that. That person is most likely a retired security personnel, or someone who has had dealings with retired or dismissed security personnel. So in all seriousness and with a sense of responsibility, we need to do these things that I mentioned as a way of addressing the security challenge that we have in the country.
All right. In the last close to 2 decades, it seems like when we are handling one aspect of the country and we're handling it well, it seems the insecurity moves to another part of the country. For instance, in the Northeast in the early 2000s, we had the Boko Haram challenge, and as it is being handled, we are seeing how things are moving to the to the northwest, and then parts of the north central. Now, if you cast your mind to the southeast for what is, going on there, the nature of insecurity there and unabated attacks and harassment of people, some people have likened it to Boko Haram when it started. And it looks like, well, it's just one of those things it will fade away, and then until it metamorphosed into something that like a hydra-headed monster. Now, what do you make of the southeast, the nature, because it is peculiar to the way it is happening in the southeast, the insecurity there, it has its own character, different from the one in the northeast or the northwest, as the case may be. If it is not handled on time, what do you see?
Well, the trend is a trend that we started monitoring from early last year. In fact, we did a map where we mapped, when I say we, I mean my consultancy, Beacon Consultancy. We mapped the security threat issues from January through to December of 2021 in the southeast, and then we divided those threat issues into 2: the threat issues that are emanated by this so-called unknown gunmen, and under those unknown gunmen, we also embedded the non-state actors, including the outlawed indigenous people of Biafra and its armed wing, the Eastern Security Network. And we were shocked at the heat map that was displayed. The heat map was almost similar to the situation in the Northeast in terms of the frequency of the attacks against especially public institutions and what they felt represented anything in terms of public institution. So yes, it's a very concerning development, but there are also similarities between what is happening in the southeast and what is happening in the northeast, in the sense that these are non-state actors, irrespective of what name we want to call them. They are non-state actors in the sense of the kind of weapons they are using. In the very recent past, especially starting this year, one of the major trends that we're seeing is the deployment of improvised explosive devices. So whenever they attack, especially security forces formations, one of the first things they do is throw IEDs at those formations and then follow it with what we call a complex attack. So throw a bomb and then raid the place using gunfire, like an active shooter situation. So similar to what we saw in the Northeast. So the type of, call it insurgency, call it insurrection, that happened in the Northeast is almost similar to the type of insurrection that is happening in the Southeast. Now, unfortunately, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, it seems we haven't learned lessons from the way we handled the insurrection or the insurgency in the Northeast. We are using the same tactics in the Southeast. We are using an attempt to use both military as well as police force against this insurrection or insurgency. I think we need to do a little bit more than that in terms of using intelligence to identify the drivers of this insurgency or insecurity, and then using a precision style counter-insurgency approach to take out the root causes of the insurrection and insurgency. Otherwise, the situation is only going to metamorphose into a high-blown insurgency or insurrection like what happened in the Northeast, unfortunately. In terms of the fatality figures, the Southeast is second to the Northwest and North Central in terms of the data that we're compiling in my consultancy. So clearly, it calls for concern, and the approach, like I said, should be a little bit different from what we did in the Northeast. Otherwise, we're going to have a situation where, like in the Northeast, we've had a decade plus of an attempt to address the issues, and unfortunately, it's only now that we're beginning to see some successes. We don't want that in the Southeast, unfortunately.
All right. When senior government officials say that even governors in some instances say that Nigerians should be allowed to carry weapons, I know they speak from the perspective of the frustration of what people go through. They can't defend themselves when these people attack and all of that. But what scenarios can play out if that happens?
So the scenario, let's use the US as an example, where they allow people to carry weapons. Gun fight or deaths from gunfights represent the highest rate of killings in the in the US. It's only occasionally that you see deaths from motor vehicle accidents, surpassing deaths from gunshots. So it's something that we need to take very, very seriously and carefully. With due respect to especially the governors who make such statements, I would encourage them to invite within their folds security experts. And when I say security expert, I'm not specifically referring to the military. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, we've got this tendency to think only the military have the knowledge in security. Security has transcended military affairs now. They should invite persons who understand national security, including the military, if they are among them, persons who really, really understand national security, invite them. There are ways to address those security issues and not necessarily with the allowing people to, carry weapons. We do have a Weapons Act, and those Weapons Act provides for the way in which you can carry a weapon. At the moment, only the president or the inspector general of police can license anyone in the country to carry a weapon. Unfortunately, the way we have administered the Weapons Act in the past has been very faulty. And in fact, just like I mentioned earlier on, this is another area where, unfortunately, we do not have a database of those that have been licensed. I say this with all sense of responsibility, and I stand to be corrected. I have attempted within my consultancy to document this number of persons. And unfortunately, we found out, based on our interactions with the authority that has the responsibility for that we do not have a database of those persons. So instead of the governors to make such a call, perhaps they should start with encouraging a review of the Weapons Act so that we start administering it more professionally. That Weapons Act was passed, if I remember well, almost in the 60s. And I know there was an attempt to review it recently, but we need to improve on that so that we use technology to document the issuance of those weapons, and more importantly, the issuance of the armament associated with the weapons. That way, our criminal justice system can be supported during prosecutions. If there is a number, a tag to any weapon, and you issue it, and that weapon is used for any crime, you can go back to that database, and easily the judge or the criminal justice system can identify the holder and use it. But when we just issue such blanket statement without the scientific backing or the technology that is required to support a system that would be useful to us as a country, and unfortunately the consequence will be similar to what we are seeing in the US at the moment. More weapons is not the way to go, but rather the introduction of a technological system that is accountable and that is also helpful to our national security.
All right. Kabir Adamu, Chief Executive Officer, Beacon Consulting, thank you so much for talking to us on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Great.